Hello there, kia ora. Welcome to tonight's Budget Week special. Joining me from the mighty Waikato, I've got Holly Snape, CE of Community Waikato. You work with a whole bunch of community organisations who can be big winners or big losers when it comes to the budget, which is why I wanted to have a chat to you. First of all, how are you going? How's the day been so far?
It's always a good day in the Waikato. Can't complain, even with winter coming.
I was down there last week and the fog threw me. And I grew up there. It was just, I think it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon I showed up and the fog was still there. Just, it lingers.
Hamilton can surprise you, eh? You know, exactly. It just sticks around. And the beauty about this place is that you absolutely feel the seasons, right? You can see them.
Oh, yeah.
So
absolutely.
There's beauty in that.
Yes. Yeah. And I should also put in an apology for Blake, who can't make it today. He's off chatting with Julianne Genter, I believe it is, about his campaign around funding for whaikaha. So he's a little bit tied up at the moment, but he will be watching this footage with bated breath, I'm sure of it. First question I've got for you then, Holly. What do you think should be in this year's budget? What would you like to see in there?
You know, it's full disclosure. I'm always going to advocate for the community and social service sector. It's the place I've been for the last 25 years or so, and we see the impact that the work in the non-profit sector. What we would love to see is government supporting the contracts that they have with non-profit organisations to deliver frontline services, and they do this and have been doing this for forever, essentially. So these are things like family harm contracts. They are around food provision, budgeting services, disability, all the services that aren't provided through government but through the community and social service sector that enables people to access what they need in order to hopefully thrive in their everyday lives. So we would love to see additional government support for that. I'm just holding my breath for a moment because we're already getting indications that this is probably not the case.
I was going to say we've already seen cuts to funding organisations like whaikaha. We've heard rumblings about the reduced funding for things like budgeting services.
So it's not just a rumbling now. We're having conversations with a number of the services that provide the government contracted budgeting program across the country. And there are contract holders throughout the country. So we have several in our region. One of our local ones has received over $100,000 cut to that contract. So it is significant, over $100,000. Another one in a small community just out of Hamilton, small community, they have had their budget reduced by 75%. So, I mean, that is inoperable. Another one over in Raglan, it's gone. So this is not just proposed or rumblings. This is already happening. And it's happening at a significant scale, which is fascinating because we're living in times of a significant, cost of living crisis, and the government would absolutely, admit that is what's happening. They'd probably blame the previous government for it, and perhaps some blame can be put there, but certainly not all the blame. So we're living through a cost of living crisis. We have people who are the working poor who have never had to go through these types of challenges financially, who benefit most from services like the budgeting services to really look at what does it really mean to do a complete budget? How do you have conversations with debtors and things like that? So it provides a lot of support and a lot of financial capacity and capability. And those services are being just completely slashed. We also know that as there are additional pressures, we see more cases of family harm. So the fact that those budgets are also being cut just blows my mind.
Then who is this budget aimed at?
Well, it's hard. You're hard pressed not to say landlords. Really, when we look at what has been taken away and from whom, and who is benefiting from this budget, and we know it's not the poor, and we know it's not middle income. It seems to be people who hold assets, that seem to be benefiting the most. that is really concerning. And I certainly understand that a promise was made, during the election to put that money back into landlords. And again, full disclosure, I am one of those people. I would absolutely rather money was going into our communities, our people who are feeling the hurt, not into landlords. So interesting, the level of commitment to that promise that was made, and yet that willingness to take away the subsidy for first home buyers, which, from my understanding, there was a bit of a commitment to hold on to that as well. Certainly no indication it would disappear, right?
No, well, before the election, the now Prime Minister was like, no, we'll definitely be keeping that. So,
Yeah. So interesting that that wasn't quite the same level of commitment to that as there is to the landlord. So, it certainly does make it hard not to be sceptical about who the government is wanting to support in this. Challenging.
It is very challenging, I think. I suspect on Thursday, when we finally see all the numbers, it's going to be one of those things that a few people wake up and go, oh, well, that is actually their priorities. And a lot of people, I think, are still a little bit blinkered in where they think this government's priorities are. How much of an influence do you think this budget is going to have from the coalition partners, from ACT New Zealand First?
I think there's going to be a lot of influence, and I think that's been part of the problem when you say it's a little hard to understand who is benefiting or where the priorities are. And I wonder if that is because there are actually split priorities across the three parties rather than a shared vision about what success looks like for New Zealand. And I think it is really hard when you're negotiating, with anybody. Collaboration's never easy, right? So I imagine that has played a significant part in the decisions that have been made for the budget. But I also think that what we will see as a result of that is not a lot of clarity around what is the goal, what is the aim of this budget.
Who do you think is going to be most negatively impacted by this budget?
I think every time we see cuts, they tend to, especially the types of cuts we're talking about here, they tend to damage the most vulnerable members of our community. And so I don't expect that will be any different this time. Certainly, we haven't heard of anything that is going into grassroots that could make life a little bit easier. We've seen the rhetoric around disability. We've seen cuts in that sector. So those are often our most vulnerable community members. We have seen cuts in the budgeting. So basically low-income earners and I think middle-income earners are going to be hurting as a result of this budget. I think I'm finding it really hard to imagine who's actually really going to benefit. And I still keep coming back to people who are holding a whole lot of assets, probably the mining communities. I imagine that they'll benefit. I do wonder if our elderly population might end up getting some benefit. Yeah, just looking at who the partners are and where their priorities are and where their voting base is, where potentially there might be some revenue going.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Winston's traditionally had an older voting base. National has a bit of a blue rinse voting base as well. ACT is a bit of an interesting one with the age groups because, they don't really seem to have like a pinpointed age group that votes for them. It tends to be about economic input.
That's right.
For them.
Yes.
Although from what I understand, there's at least one person within the ACT Party who definitely knows the voter base he's aiming for, and it's far too young to vote. But it's very strange, strange place. Very strange. And that's legal.
You know what? There is a lot of value, though, I think, in us growing the civics understanding of our younger populations and engaging them early. Obviously, I was a supporter of lowering the voting age as well. But, so I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a bad thing if politicians are really trying to engage young people. I would love to see a growing interest in investing in our young people that way. Yeah.
The speaker before you on this is Matthew Tukaki, who was really concerned about the amount of money going into Te Ao Māori from this budget. This goes out on Tuesday night, tomorrow is the last day people can make submissions on changes to local government law around the inclusion of Māori wards. Do you think that this kind of rhetoric around the role of Māori in civics is something that people should be paying attention to at the moment?
I think it's critical that we pay attention to this. Te Tiriti o Waitangi is still a founding document of our country and of our relationships. I am a great supporter of Māori wards, and I'm about to go into my writing of my submission because I do think it's critical that we get people talking about why it's important and what sort of growth in representation that we have seen in the last year or so of 18 months of Māori wards being represented around the country. I'm really concerned as well, and I think the language that we're hearing is quite divisive too, and it's really interesting that the argument has been that the treaty or Te Tiriti is divisive, but actually it's the fundamental purpose of the treaty is actually to do completely the opposite. It's it's about an understanding of how we live together. So it is really concerning to hear the way that it is being used to be divisive, and the amount of misinformation around things like Māori wards. The amount of people that still think the Māori have more than one vote.
The ACT Party has a newsletter that they put out called the Free Press, the 22nd of May. So just last week, they put in that newsletter that this would stop Māori from having more than one vote. Like, they actually put it in there themselves, knowing full well that that's bullshit. But the fact that it's in there, and that I've now seen it pop up on forums, particularly in Tauranga, where they've got their first local body election in a while, people go, well, look, this is why the commissioners are bad, because ACT told us this. It's crazy.
Well, and it gets worse than that, Paul, because the other side of that is that if you're a landlord in more than one electorate, you do get more than one vote. You get to vote around unless you own Māori land. Anyway, that's a whole that's a whole other aside, right? So, this whole one person, one vote thing only actually applies when we're talking about certain groups of people as well.
Yeah.
But the whole point is that this is active misinformation.
Mm-hmm.
This is not true. It's disinformation. Anyway, it is. Yeah. And that is really worrying, because you get people who have got good hearts that believe in things like democracy that obviously see a problem with something like that. And it's really hard to, when you've got an authority like a political party telling you that this is the way it is, it's actually quite hard to say, well, that's just not true.
Yeah.
So very, very problematic.
Oh, yeah. When I saw that come out, I'm just going, no, that can't be right. Like, they physically can't. And, went through and had a look at the news and like, yep, that's actually word for word what they said. It was, sometimes you just want to strangle them and just shake some sense into them. Sometimes, in a metaphorical way, of course. Jumping back to the budget stuff, we've had a number of pre-budget announcements so far. What have you thought of those, and are there any that sort of jump out for you in particular?
I think the announcements seem so far actually just they dishearten me every time, and I've become less and less wanting to hear the next one. And that's really worrying, because I'm someone who's quite political and gets really interested in these things and usually feels really engaged. I'm actually finding I'm feeling more and more disenfranchised. I can't imagine how others feel who are going to be more directly negatively impacted by this budget. Of course, I keep an eye out on what's happening, particularly around community and social services. It has just been frightening to see what's been happening. Things like the school lunches, they're just it's such a simple thing. As someone who's been involved in feeding kids before school, which I used to do in a previous iteration, you just saw how much value children got out of having a meal. And we never checked who could afford the food and who couldn't. That wasn't the purpose of it. It was actually to have a place of gathering, to share something, to do a reset before kids went to school. You don't know the environment these kids have come from. You don't know what's happening at home. This is a way to just be prepared for a day of learning and then going off into that environment with a full stomach. It was quite I don't want to say life-changing, that's, too extreme, but you absolutely saw the benefit and you saw the change in children, with that expectation that they were going to have food and that they could sit with their friends and they could just, chill out before they got into their days. School lunches, I just think, are just such a fundamental part of ensuring that children have access to what they need in order to be able to learn. And just not being hungry, makes such a massive difference. We also know that there are growing truancy rates, and there's been plenty of research that shows the connection between truancy and food access, food insecurity. Yeah. So those are the things that are jumping out at me that I'm just so frustrated about, because I think the size of the budget for that, it's not huge, right? I mean, these are drops in the ocean. They're tinkering around the edges, but that tinkering has such an impact on the people that can afford to be tinkered with the least.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The one that threw me actually about the school lunches program was how it came out with, "We've saved school lunches." Like, who did you save them from? Who was threatening to get rid of them? But that doesn't come through in the narrative. One of the interesting bits that I saw pop up over the weekend actually was Erica Stanford on Q&A, talking about the fact that there are so many kids missing school because they're getting sick. We've got another COVID wave coming, all that kind of stuff. While they're sitting there trying, we need to get the numbers of attendance up, but we are aware of the fact that teachers are the most at risk of getting COVID, that students carry COVID, that they're at risk of getting sick, but we've got to get those numbers up no matter what. Doesn't feel
Well,
like
yeah, and
they're looking at the big picture.
encouraging sick kids to go to school.
Yeah,
That just seemed absolutely insane to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That is
yeah.
public health 101, right?
Who needs a healthy society? What a weird concept is that? It's
Yeah.
very strange. It's like we actually have a hospital up here on the North Shore that is completely empty at the moment because the government won't fund staff for it. Like, they built the
Wow.
hospital and now they just won't put funding in for the staffing levels. It's just it's painful, really
But
painful.
of course, nothing frontline will be impacted, right?
Yeah, well, that was actually a question I wanted to ask you as well, because a lot of the community sector work that we see would be considered frontline because you're dealing directly with people. But, backroom is sort of the catchphrase that we're hearing from
Yeah,
the government, is where the cuts are coming.
that's right. And I'm not sure, because we don't get insight into exactly what's happening in terms of these funding cut decisions in government departments, right? But it feels to me, and this is total conjecture, that the MSD, perhaps being told to save 7%, are choosing to make some of those savings by not putting that funding into those contracts that they have held. And that might not be the case. That might be on top of, the savings that they're making internally. But I'd be really curious to get some data on that, because it feels a bit suspicious in terms of timing, right?
Yeah, it really does. In terms of grassroots movements, obviously a lot of the community work sector would fall under that sort of umbrella of grassroots. Has there been a sort of general bit of feedback on how they're feeling at the moment in terms of what
Yeah,
they're expecting?
there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around how are we going to maintain services. The reality is, most of us who work in this sector do so because we believe in the value of the work. What we end up often seeing as we have cuts to funding is a whole lot of unpaid work and overworked people. So it makes our whole sector more unhealthy potentially as well, which is concerning. But we will have job losses because there's just no way that you can maintain your service with a 75% cut to your budget. You just can't. Either people will volunteer their time, which means they're going to sit on a benefit potentially while they volunteer their time, to provide these budgeting services. The irony in that, certainly not lost on me. So there's a lot of desperation. There's a lot of concern. People are looking at, well, where are our other options? But actually, we've worked on the smell of an oily rag for many years anyway. There isn't a lot of fat in our systems in the non-profit sector. So the options are essentially stop providing services or do it for free.
Hmm.
I can't
Neither are great
imagine
options.
many. provinces that choose to do that. I don't imagine a roading company deciding, you know what, we need that road anyway, government can't afford it, we're just going to get out there and put that road in anyway. And yet somehow there's an expectation in the non-profit sector that that's what we should do. We should be doing this for free. You hear it all the time with the a lot of arguments. Why would I donate to that organisation when 20% of it goes to admin? It's like, well, someone's got to run the organisation. We're not all in a privileged position where we can volunteer our time, unfortunately. So yeah.
Is there a bit of feedback as well from your local MPs? Like, have you heard anything from your local MPs around what's coming in the budget or how this might impact those community groups?
No, I haven't heard much from our local MPs at all. I did run into Ryan Hamilton on a plane recently.
I'm so sorry.
But and I think part of it is that our local MPs from Kirikiriroa at least are both very, very new to this space, so they're finding their feet. It's not like the Nanaia Mahuta, for example, who was highly experienced, skilled politician who has been around for a long time, understood the landscape, knew what was coming. We've got two very, very new MPs, and I respect to them because I know that would be a very, very difficult space to be in, and it's a difficult financial time to be in that role. So I'm going to give them that credit. But I think at the moment too, their priority is probably understanding what's going on in Wellington, and also building their probably more natural relationships, which will be more within their circles, and both of them come from more of a sort of business space. But I do think it's on us as a sector to start really connecting to ensure they understand the impact that these decisions are having on our community and on the people that benefit from those community services. So I think that's part of, I suppose, for capacity strengtheners like us at Community Waikato, that's an opportunity that we will have to really reach out and just make sure our influencers and decision makers understand that landscape.
I was going to say, Tama Potaka is one of the Kirikiriroa MPs, and he's Minister for Māori Affairs. So he has a finger in many portfolios, and he has been there a little bit longer than Ryan, by about sort of 12 months or so.
Months, yes.
Do you think he is aware of the disproportionate impact some of these policies could have on Te Ao Māori?
I find it, I don't know. To be honest, I just don't know. You would like to think, but I also think that that we all come with such different ideologies, and I think that Tama's ideology is very, very different from mine in terms of understanding the consequences of this stuff. Look, some people from the right wing might say this is motivating. I've heard a wonderful saying that you give money to the rich to motivate them to do stuff. You take money away from the poor to motivate them to do stuff. And that's kind of that right wing ideology, right? So I don't know if they truly understand the impact that it has at that grassroots level. I do think that that the intention is to try and kickstart an economy. I think. I don't know, to be honest. It all looks a little bit confusing.
Did our economy need to be kickstarted?
Well, it's not the rock star economy it used to be, Paul.
Oh, okay. So, what changed, I wonder?
What changed? It is really interesting because I think that, those of us on the left, see the importance of investing in spaces where inequities exist, and we fear budgets that are coming like this because of the potential for inequity to grow. And I think that that's the frustration, and that's the messaging we would want our right-wing brethren to understand. I think the problem is when you live within the neoliberal. I mean, we've been swimming in the soup for many, many years, right? Since the 80s, this neoliberal space, that it's really easy to put the blame on non-performance on the poor, rather than looking at how the systems contribute to that growing inequity. So I think that that's the difficulty, is that the rhetoric we're still faced with, individualizes people's success and people's lack of success. And so we never question the systems that are put in place that actually are driving, these patterns.
That's actually been one of my big criticisms of the pre-budget announcements. You hear we're going to build a mega prison in Waikato, for example. And it's like, okay, how do you stop people going to prison? Well, we're going to be tough on crime. But why are they committing the crime? Well, what doesn't matter. We're going to be tough and we're going to crack down on gangs and we're going to do all this. It's like,
There's an unspoken, belief then in that being tough on crime, that harder penalties will dissuade people from committing crimes. And I don't know about you, Paul, but I don't avoid committing crime because I'm scared of going to jail. That's not the driver for me, right? I don't not kill people because I don't want to end up with a life sentence. It's not a driver. There are so many other drivers of crime. Policing, particular style of policing we have now. We used to have community policing, which was also a little bit more front end, which was about building communities and connecting and then identifying issues and diverting away from that kind of the court system and then the prison system. But the policing that we have now is really all about detecting crime and then punishing criminals. I don't see really anything in our system that is focused on deterring crime.
so it's more reactive than proactive.
That is researched. Yeah. The stuff with Harry Tam was a really good example, right? With this whole rhetoric around we're giving criminals money and to run programs and stuff. Actually, there have been some fantastic programs run by people who have criminal backgrounds, who have a much better relationship and connection to those more at risk of committing criminal offences. And their programs are really successful. The prison has a terrible rate of recidivism. So we know that isn't working, right?
It just doesn't seem like they've thought the whole process, like looked at the big picture and gone, right, how do we fix the big picture by fixing little things as we go along?
But it comes down to blaming the people who caused the harm in the first, well, no, not the first place, the people that are detected creating or committing the crime. And of course, it's only certain types of crime too, right? There are some crimes that we're less likely to hold people quite to the same account. And I think looking at, what a single mother on a benefit who commits benefit fraud, the impact or how she ends up being dealt with in a court system as opposed to somebody who's a white collar criminal who hasn't paid some tax, disproportionate the amount of that blue collar crime going through the court system and the white collar crime just.
So I did a
not
piece a couple of weeks ago, it must have been, when they announced the return of the three strikes law. And one of the interesting bits of the research that came out of that was that white collar crime is the only crime that actually gets impacted by people's fear of the three strikes law. It's a standard violent crime, those kind of things, but it's not a consideration for the people who are involved in that, because that tends to be more emotional. But white collar crime, because it's more of a thought out process, tends to be the kind of thing that people go, oh no, three strikes, don't want to risk that. Which I thought was actually a really interesting thing, because that law will never be put in place for them.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. Yes. So I think that there's I think the fundamental issue is sometimes the way that we look at the world and way that we understand what is creating inequity, what is creating success, what creates failure or crime, and and if you blame individuals and if you see them individuals as being responsible for their success or their failure, then you can see why these kinds of programs and the kinds of cuts that they have already announced make some sense, right? Like even the first home buyer one, and also just the lack of understanding of the impact of that, with this whole, it's only 4%, it's $5,000, it doesn't mean much, just like how disconnected are you from the reality of people trying to save a deposit?
Yeah, not forgetting Chris Bishop lives in his parents-in-law's house, so maybe he doesn't understand.
I don't think you could make a comment like that and understand the actual impact, or you can't understand what it is to try and save that money when you have other financial responsibilities. And saying, oh, it might take an extra year. I tell you what, I can't think of a year where house prices have only gone up by $5,000. Like, so you know, that extra year is actually, it pushes you further away so often. And I just, it begs belief, really.
I think that's actually a really good place for us to wrap up this part of the interview. Thank you very much for joining me, Holly. It is very greatly appreciated. Don't forget, we've got other episodes coming up over the next couple of days. Keep tuning in, find out a little bit more from other people about their perspectives on the budget. Until next time, ka kite anō. Have a great time.